I got to tell you something. I think it would have been a lot of work for me 5 years ago. It would have been a lot of work because my head wasn't together then.
In 1990, audiences thought they were seeing the legendary Sammy Davis Jr. take his final bow. They had no idea they were watching a hostage. Behind the spotlight, mob enforcers were waiting in his dressing room. Doctors had found throat cancer months earlier, but Davis kept it secret. Why? $7 million in debt, gambling losses to dangerous men. Even Frank Sinatra begged him to stop, showing up with a $500,000 check to save his friend. But Davis refused. His last show wasn't a celebration. It was a death sentence. Sammy Davis Jr. was born right into the spotlight on December 8, 1925, in Harlem Hospital. His parents were both vaudeville performers, always on the move with the Will Maston troupe. While they toured, baby Sammy stayed with his grandmother in New York. But everything changed when he turned 3. His parents separated, and his father took him along on the road, not to raise him like a normal child, but to train him as a performer. From that point on, Sammy's life was anything but ordinary. While other kids were learning the alphabet, Sammy was learning how to dance in front of strangers. He wasn't just a kid tagging along, he was the act. The group even changed its name to the Will Maston Trio, featuring Sammy Davis Jr. Just to highlight how good he was. To keep performing without running into trouble with child labor laws, Sammy's father and Will Maston came up with a strange plan. They pretended little Sammy was actually a fully grown adult with a growth disorder. At only 4 years old, Sammy was introduced to the world as a 44-year-old midget named Silent Sam. They dressed him in tiny suits, gave him a rubber cigar, and told him to stay silent off stage to keep up the act. It was all a lie, of course, but it worked for years. People believed he was a strange, silent adult, not a child. He didn't go to school or make friends his age. He was told to act like a grown man every single day. It was confusing and lonely, but it also helped him become a showman far beyond his years. Education was never part of his life. Sammy didn't go to school, not once. He grew up on stage, traveling non-stop, rehearsing, performing, and living out of suitcases. At best, he had part-time tutors whenever the law got too close. By the time he was a teenager, he still couldn't read more than comic books. He was ashamed of it, but had no time to fix it. Then, in 1943, everything changed again. He was drafted into the Army and placed in the 1st Integrated Unit. There, a sergeant noticed how bright he was and started helping him learn to read. For the first time in his life, Sammy had someone who believed in his mind, not just his talent. He called that sergeant his savior, and the lessons he learned in those barracks would stay with him forever. Despite never learning music the traditional way, Sammy had a natural gift that shocked everyone. By age 7, he could play drums, trumpet, piano, and vibraphone, all by ear. No sheet music, no formal classes. He just watched, listened, and mimicked. His drumming especially amazed older musicians. And while all that was happening, he was also training with Bill Bojangles Robinson, the top tap dancer of the time. Sammy wasn't just a dancer or a musician. He was both and more. He could sing, mime, and tell jokes, too. His performances were packed with energy and variety, and it all came from years of learning on the go, night after night. That same year, when he was only 7, Sammy also made his first appearance on the big screen. He starred in a short film called Rufus Jones for President, alongside blues legend Ethel Waters. The movie was about a young black boy becoming president, a wild idea in the 1930s. Sammy played the lead role and danced his heart out. Even though the film had stereotypes common in those days, It was still a major moment. It had an all-black cast, and Sammy's talent stood out in every scene. It was the start of his long relationship with show business, even if it would be more than 20 years before he appeared in another movie. Sammy Davis Jr. was only 17 when he was drafted into the U.S. Army in 1943. He was barely 5'6" and weighed just 120 pounds, but none of that mattered to the military. He was thrown into a newly integrated unit at Fort Warren in Wyoming, a place where the rules may have changed on paper, but not in people's hearts. Sammy had grown up sheltered in the world of show business. His father and uncle, both performers, had kept him away from the worst of racism. But the Army stripped that protection away overnight. Suddenly, he wasn't a performer. He wasn't a star. He was just a black teenager, surrounded by men who made it their mission to break him. It didn't take long before the abuse started. One night while he was asleep, a group of white soldiers attacked him in the barracks. They painted his entire face and body white. It wasn't a prank. It was a message. They were trying to erase who he was, reduce him to nothing. That incident left scars that ran deeper than anything physical. And what made it worse, this happened inside an integrated unit. The Army might have changed the rules, but the hatred was still alive and well. The attacks kept coming. Some soldiers began urinating in his drinks, over and over again. He'd go to take a sip of beer and taste it. Warm, sour, humiliating. It wasn't just about bullying. It was a way of forcing him to swallow their hatred, literally. He talked about it years later on TV, but you could still see the pain in his eyes. That kind of torment doesn't just go away. And as if that wasn't enough, he was regularly beaten. His nose was broken 3 different times in fights he didn't ask for. The men who attacked him weren't just trying to hurt him. They wanted to remind him that, in their eyes, he would never be equal. One day, he finally snapped. A white soldier said something racist, and Sammy punched him. The man fell to the ground, bleeding. But then he looked up and said, "Well, you beat me, but you're still a nigger." That moment hit Sammy harder than any punch. That's when he realized that no matter how hard he fought back, the rules were rigged. Winning a fight didn't change the way people saw him. That was the turning point. He decided he wasn't going to fight with fists anymore. His talent would be his weapon. And he wasn't alone. A sergeant named Williams became his mentor, the one person who helped keep him grounded. Williams helped channel all that pain into something bigger: performance, purpose, survival. Years later, in 1954, something else changed his life forever. He was driving his brand new Cadillac Eldorado from Las Vegas to Hollywood when a crash with 2 elderly women sent his face into the steering wheel. That steering wheel had a dangerous decorative spike right in the middle. It smashed into his eye socket. Doctors couldn't save the eye. He later found out Cadillac removed that spike from all future models because of his accident. But Sammy wasn't thinking about lawsuits or safety. His first words when he woke up were, "Can I still dance?" He didn't care about fame or even his face. He just wanted to keep performing. As he lay in the hospital, staring at the ceiling, something shifted inside him. He had always worn a mezuzah given to him by Eddie Cantor, a Jewish friend, for good luck. The only time he forgot to wear it was the night of the crash. That stuck with him. While recovering, he read about Jewish history, and something clicked. The pain, the persecution, the survival. It reminded him of his own people's struggle. Judaism gave him a new way to make sense of his life. It took a few more years, but in 1960, he officially converted. He had found a faith that understood him. But even before all that, back in 1947, his life had started to take off. That year, he performed at the Capitol Theater in New York with the Will Mastin Trio. Frank Sinatra was the headliner. Sammy was just 21, but he blew everyone away, including Sinatra. That night changed everything. The two became close friends. And when Sammy had that horrific accident years later, Sinatra didn't just send flowers. He told him, "You're staying at my place in Palm Springs until you get back on your feet." It wasn't just friendship. It was loyalty. It was power. And together, they used it to change things. The Rat Pack didn't start out as a brand or a business. It started as a hangout. Back in the late 1940s, a few famous faces like Errol Flynn, Nat King Cole, and Mickey Rooney used to gather at Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall's house. Bacall once joked they looked like a goddamn rat pack, and the name stuck, though the guys themselves preferred calling it the Clan or the Summit. But the version that became legendary didn't come together until the early 1960s. That's when Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop took over Las Vegas. What made it electric wasn't just the names, it was the chemistry. In 1960, during the filming of Ocean's 11, they'd shoot the movie all day and then perform at the Sands Hotel at night. One night, they did an impromptu show, and the crowd went wild. Word spread fast, and just like that, their act turned into a sold-out phenomenon. Over a 4-week period, 34,000 people packed into the Sands just to catch the show. That same year, Ocean's 11 hit theaters. It wasn't just a movie, it was an extension of their act. They played army buddies pulling off a casino heist, but really, they were just being themselves on screen. The movie felt real because it was. People could see them on screen, then watch them on stage that same night. And for Sammy Davis Jr., this movie was huge. It wasn't common back then to see a black performer treated as an equal in a white-dominated cast. After Ocean's 11, they made more films together like Sergeants 3. And when Lawford was pushed out of the group, Bing Crosby stepped in for Robin and the Seven Hoods. Critics didn't always love their movies. They called them vanity projects, but audiences loved them. The movies made money, and Ocean's 11 in particular went on to inspire a whole franchise decades later. But behind the fun was a brutal schedule. During Ocean's 11, they'd be on set early in the morning, then hit the stage at night for not one, but sometimes 2 or 3 shows. In Chicago, they once did 15 shows in just a single week, with recordings made by Reprise Records. There were wild parties in between, and the energy they poured into their act seemed endless, but it was also exhausting. Sammy Davis Jr. later admitted he barely slept, sometimes just a few hours before jumping back into makeup at dawn. Not everyone partied hard, though. Sinatra and Davis lived up to their wild reputations, but Dean Martin, despite his drunk-on-stage act, was quiet off stage. He'd often skip the after-parties, preferring to sleep. And this actually annoyed Sinatra. And then there was the other side of the story, the one that didn't make the headlines. Sammy Davis Jr. might have been performing on the biggest stages in Las Vegas, but he still wasn't treated equally. In those days, black performers had to enter through the kitchen. They couldn't stay in the same hotels, gamble in the casinos, or even use the front entrance. Even Lena Horne wasn't safe from this treatment. When she left a hotel, some staff would burn the sheets she used. If a black performer dipped so much as a toe into a swimming pool, the pool would be drained and scrubbed. It was ugly, and Davis lived that reality every day, even while being cheered on by thousands at the Sands. Still, he wasn't entirely alone. Sinatra had his back. When the Sands Hotel refused to give Davis a proper room, Sinatra threatened to cancel his own shows unless they let Davis stay. And it worked. Every time they showed up at a casino, Sinatra would make it clear: no Sammy, no show. That kind of power forced the Strip to start changing. But that power came with baggage. Sinatra's friends weren't just Hollywood insiders, they included top mobsters like Sam Giancana. The FBI watched him for decades. In 1962, when a CIA-backed plot involving Giancana and the Kennedys fell apart, Sinatra was blamed. Giancana forced the Rat Pack to do free shows at the mob-owned Villa Venice nightclub in Illinois, just to keep things cool with the mafia bosses. Meanwhile, the story of Sammy Davis Jr. and Kim Novak wasn't just a Hollywood romance. It was a dangerous gamble with life-threatening consequences. It all began in 1956, when they met on The Steve Allen Show. Sammy was already a star with the Will Maston Trio, and Novak was Columbia Pictures' rising golden girl. They hit it off fast. By the time she was filming Vertigo, Davis was sneaking onto the set pretending to be a photographer, just to be near her. She caught him jokingly and said, "Did you ever think of taking off the lens cover?" It was flirtation. It was real, and it quickly turned into something deeper. That fall, Novak visited Chicago and came to see Davis perform at Chez Paris. Their bond grew stronger. By Thanksgiving, she was at his home, spending the holiday with him. By Christmas, Sammy was so desperate to see her, he canceled his Vegas show and flew to Chicago just to meet her parents. In 1957, that was bold. Too bold for the world they lived in. Behind the scenes, Harry Cohn, the boss of Columbia Pictures, was furious. He saw Kim Novak as his creation, his investment. And more than that, he was a man obsessed with control. Cohn had mob ties, wiretapped his own studios, and idolized dictators like Mussolini. So when he heard rumors from a gossip column that Sammy and Kim might have even applied for a marriage license, he exploded. An interracial relationship threatened his power over Novak's image, and he was willing to do anything to stop it. In January 1958, the threat arrived. Not through lawyers, through mobster Mickey Cohen. He found Sammy's father at the racetrack and gave him a brutal message. Sammy had 24 hours to marry a black woman, or something terrible would happen to him. These weren't empty threats. Cohn had real connections, the kind that didn't just ruin careers, they ended lives. Sammy panicked. He called Chicago mob boss Sam Giancana for help, but even Giancana said he couldn't protect him in Hollywood. That night at the Sands Hotel, Davis flipped through his address book, trying to figure out who he could marry. Fast. His friend Arthur Silber watched in horror as Sammy said, "I'm looking for someone to marry." And it wasn't just words. Davis was allegedly kidnapped by the mob not long after. According to accounts, he was pulled into a car in Las Vegas and driven out into the desert. They reminded him he'd already lost one eye in a car crash, and now they threatened to take his other one. They said they'd blind him, break his legs, and bury him where no one would ever find him if he didn't stay away from Novak. That night, the pressure broke him. Terrified, Davis began flipping through his address book, trying to find someone, anyone, to marry. He eventually called Lorraine White, a 23-year-old singer he'd briefly dated. She agreed. On January 10, 1958, they got married at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas. But this wasn't a real love story. It was survival. Davis reportedly paid White between $10,000 and $25,000 to go through with it. The plan was clear. Stay married for a little while, then separate quietly. She understood what was at stake. Their wedding photos showed them smiling beside a massive martini glass and a cake with happiness written on it. But the truth couldn't have been more tragic. That same night, the pressure finally broke Sammy. He had been drinking heavily, and during the car ride to the hotel suite, he snapped. He tried to strangle Lorraine White in a drunken rage. His friend Arthur Silber Jr. had to pull him off her. Back in the suite, it got even worse. Silber walked in to find Davis holding a gun to his own head. He tackled him just in time and sat on his chest until he passed out. As Davis cried, he asked the one question that haunted him for the rest of his life. Why won't they let me live my life? The marriage lasted just 8 months. They never lived together, never acted like a couple. By September 1958, it was over. Lorraine filed for divorce, citing cruelty. After the split, Lorraine faded into obscurity, while Davis moved on, eventually marrying Swedish actress May Britt in 1960. Then came the final insult. After campaigning hard for John F. Kennedy in 1960, Davis was supposed to perform at the inauguration. But after his marriage to May Britt, Kennedy uninvited him. Interracial marriage was still illegal in most U.S. states, and Kennedy didn't want to upset Southern Democrats. Even though Davis had helped him win, he was pushed aside. He didn't argue. He just said, "I understand. Thank you for calling." 12 years later, Davis stunned the world again, this time by hugging President Nixon. It happened on stage at a Republican rally in 1972. Davis, a lifelong Democrat, had switched sides and even donated money to Nixon's re-election. When Nixon gave him a gold record for The Candyman, Davis hugged him. The photo caused an uproar. Black fans saw him as a sellout. White racists were furious too. Even his liberal friends turned their backs on him. Not long after, Davis showed up at a concert for Jesse Jackson's Operation Push. But when he took the stage, the crowd booed him. That moment cut deep. Davis later said, "If your own people turn you away, then all the money, diamonds, and fame mean nothing." No matter what he did, he was always stuck in the middle. Too black for some, not black enough for others. By the late 1970s, Sammy Davis Jr. wasn't just a showbiz legend. He was falling apart behind the scenes. What started as a way to keep up with his demanding schedule turned into a $40,000 a month cocaine habit. He was mixing alcohol with drugs, staying awake for days at a time, and it showed. In 1974, he had a heart attack. It should have been a wake-up call, but it wasn't. His performances became sloppy. He'd forget lyrics, act strange on stage, and in 1978, he collapsed in front of a live Las Vegas crowd. Rehab didn't help much. He relapsed fast. By 1983, his liver was so damaged that doctors warned one more drink could kill him. It wasn't until 1985, with everything on the line, his career, his life, that he finally got serious about getting clean. But drugs weren't his only vice. During that same time, Sammy became obsessed with pornography in a way that disturbed even his closest friends. He carried around a trunk stuffed with over 200 adult films and screened them constantly. At parties, backstage, even in dressing rooms before shows. His Beverly Hills home became infamous for wild gatherings filled with drugs, sex, and non-stop adult film marathons. He installed a projection system above his bed and reportedly got lessons from adult film stars like Linda Lovelace. In 1977, he even appeared in a soft-core film, Linda Lovelace for President. The scenes were cut, but the damage was done. His obsession leaked into his stage shows, where he'd crack crude jokes and make audience members visibly uncomfortable. The worst part of it all was how this lifestyle bled into his marriage. Sammy married Altavice Gore in 1970, but it quickly turned toxic. Fueled by his addiction to porn and his craving for extreme experiences, He pressured Altavis into sexual situations that left her feeling violated and ashamed. He wanted to reenact porn scenes, involve strangers, even swap partners at parties. In 1975, he forced her into a threesome with a fan. Later, he convinced her to pose for explicit photos and showed them to others without her permission. Things spiraled until 1983, when he tried to involve her in something so horrifying, an act involving a dog at a party, that she fled. They eventually reconciled, but the emotional damage never healed. As he grew older, his body began breaking down. The man who once lit up the stage with world-class tap dancing was struggling to move. In 1985, he had major hip surgery. He canceled shows, lost money, and even when he came back, something was off. His movements were stiff, limited. In 1987, he had a full hip replacement. That was the end of the Sammy Davis Jr. people remembered. During a 1988 show, he tried his signature sliding split. Instead of cheers, there was silence. He collapsed in pain and had to finish the performance sitting on a stool. What started as just another doctor's visit in September 1989 turned into a nightmare for Sammy Davis Jr. He was hoping for a quick checkup and a clean bill of health. Instead, doctors found something in his throat that changed everything. The diagnosis? Cancer. Throat cancer. And by the time they caught it, the disease had already taken hold. Sammy tried to stay positive. He told the press he'd be back on stage by the end of the year, but behind the scenes, he was already struggling. He'd been hoarse for months, had trouble swallowing, and could barely get through his performances during the tour with Frank Sinatra and Liza Minnelli. But no one in the audience knew. At Haraz, in Lake Tahoe, even in pain, he kept smiling, kept singing. Because he didn't want to let anyone down. He told his valet quietly, "I know what this is." But showing weakness? That wasn't an option. Not for someone who spent his whole life having to be twice as good to get half the credit. Sammy had another weight on his back, one that wasn't medical. The mob hadn't forgotten about him. For decades, he'd been tangled in shady dealings with organized crime figures, especially in Vegas. Some of them had helped his career. Others had just used him. Now, when he was weakest, they came knocking again. In early 1990, mob associates started showing up at his Beverly Hills home. He owed money, old gambling debts, protection fees from long ago. Some said he once lost $40,000 in a single night. He was being squeezed, and there was no escaping it. These guys weren't just angry. They had power, and they knew how to use it. The FBI had files going back to the 60s detailing how Davis had been blackmailed, even kidnapped. Now, with his health failing, they wanted their money. That's why he kept performing. It wasn't just for pride, it was survival. People around him admitted that shows were being booked just to generate quick cash to pay off the mob. His body was breaking, but the show had to go on. Frank Sinatra, who had been like a brother to Sammy, couldn't take it anymore. By December, he showed up at Sammy's house with a $500,000 check. He said he'd help cover the IRS bills, more than $5 million at that point. He begged Sammy to stop performing, to rest, to let his friends help. But Sammy refused. He'd always been proud, maybe too proud. Even when Sinatra had once paid for his hospital bills after that horrible car crash in 1954, Sammy hated the feeling of being dependent. Now, even at the end, he wanted to handle it on his own. Sinatra canceled all his own shows to stay by Sammy's side as things got worse. And after Sammy died, Sinatra didn't make a big public show of grief. But in private, he told friends, "We had something special." I'll see him again someday. He meant it. Sammy's final performances were brutal. Backstage, he could barely move. He leaned on his valet just to walk. He was in constant pain. His voice was a whisper. But once he stepped into the spotlight, it was like magic. The audience saw the same old Sammy, dancing, singing, smiling. No one knew what it cost him. He was on heavy pain meds, including some dangerous ones with laudanum. They helped him get through a show, but they also messed with his breathing and made him dizzy. At one show, he collapsed between songs. A stagehand tried to stop him from going back out. Sammy just said, "They paid to see me dance, not to see me die." And he went right back out there. Doctors found another tumor in early 1990. This one couldn't be removed. He was down to less than 90 pounds. He couldn't talk the way he used to. But he still showed up, still smiled, still tried to be the Sammy everyone loved. When he died on May 16, 1990, the headlines were full of tributes. Everyone talked about how much he had done for music, movies, and civil rights, but almost no one talked about what he left behind: a mountain of debt. Despite 6 decades in showbiz, he owed the IRS more than $5 million. With interest and penalties, it climbed to over $7 million. His estate was worth just $4 million. That wasn't even close to enough. His wife, Altavise, had to auction off everything: jewelry, art, memorabilia, even his tap shoes. One pair sold for $111,000. But it still wasn't enough. While he lay dying, some of the people he trusted were robbing him, stealing clothes, jewelry, priceless items from his home. His Beverly Hills house had to be sold. He had hoped to donate his gun collection to a museum, but that never happened. The debts ate everything. Vegas did honor him in one special way. They turned off all the lights on the Strip for 10 minutes. That had only ever been done for JFK and Martin Luther King Jr. before him. It was a grand gesture. But in the end, the man who had entertained millions died, broke, in pain, and still trying to dance.